So how do you think competition should be handled? In the armed forces, you shoot down the competition in real terms. In corporate sectors, you have strategies playing around the competition. So what were the strategies that you played when you went into the retail business as a CEO? When you went into the retail business, were your strategies some different than the others? What was your market analysis? What was your market watchdog? And how were you monitoring how your team is handling the competition?
My sense is that the competition, so there is this term called competitive intelligence. I don't know if you've heard of this term, competitive intelligence. And a lot of people confuse it with competitor intelligence. I believe that the real competition for any entrepreneur is not necessarily going to come from a competitor. It will come from forces which they have not, like, I'll give you an example. If you remember, do you remember the Remington typewriter?
Yes.
Remington typewriter always thought brother typewriter was their competition. Japanese firm would make it cheaper and they would compete against brother. They never saw the PC coming. Can you imagine if you are the owner of Remington typewriter, you are Remington typewriters, you already have every person who needs a PC as your captive customer. He is using a typewriter, for God's sake, he has to move to a PC. And yet they never saw the PC coming as competition. Similarly, supermarkets never saw gas stations, outlets, grocery outlets as a competition. So I think the real competition that a startup CEO has to be worried about, or an entrepreneur has to be worried about, is not the competitor. Because I must tell you honestly, the competitor is as imaginative or unimaginative as you are. It is the maverick who is coming in from outside, who will come from a totally different direction. There's a very famous case study, and I'm sure many of you might have read it, at the very famous beer company, I think it's Coors, I'm not sure of the brand, doesn't really matter, which in Africa, especially in Nigeria and a couple of other countries, suddenly saw their market share disappearing. And they were bewildered. What is happening? Why are young people not drinking beer? Not just their beer. They were not drinking anybody else's beer either. They were just going down in beer consumption. And actually they found that the reason was the advent of mobile phones. Now you'd wonder, what has mobile phones got to do with beer? The fact is that the beer drinking was more of a social get-together. So that $20 that this youngster had, he was spending it in a social get-together which was being serviced by beer until the time phones came, because that became the social network. Now beer companies could think of other beer companies as competition and they could keep fighting each other till the cows come home, but they will never identify that the real competition is actually coming from a totally different sphere. So I think the first challenge is to really identify who is your competition. And many times we think that because I am selling houses, anyone else who's selling houses is competition. If I'm selling makeup, anyone else who's doing, but that's not necessarily true. A cosmetic firm may actually get competition from better yoga cleansing of the skin. It may come from somewhere else totally, and unless that ability, see, remember, a startup CEO's core trait has to be the ability to spot opportunities. That's why he's a startup CEO, right? So he must also have the ability to discern competition before he becomes a competitor.